Saint-Domingue, 1784. You are standing in a cane field at 4 in the morning, and the overseer's torch is already moving along the row behind you. Your hands have not fully closed into fists since the cutting season began 6 weeks ago. The tendons are swollen, the skin across the knuckles split and resealed so many times that the scar tissue has built up into hard ridges that crack open again each morning when you grip the machete. The air is thick and sweet with the smell of cut cane and the particular wet heat of a Caribbean night that never fully cools. Somewhere in the darkness ahead of you, the mill is already turning. It turns every hour of every day during the harvest season. It does not stop for weather. It does not stop for injury. It does not stop for the men and women who feed it. Today, you are going to live the life of a man who was taken from everything he knew, carried across an ocean in conditions that were designed to destroy him, and put to work building the most profitable colony in the world, a colony whose sugar sweetened the coffee of European aristocrats who never once considered where it came from or what it cost. He did not survive to see the fire that he helped start, but the fire started. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me in the comments, at which point in this story would you have broken? Let's go back to the beginning. You were born in the 1760s in the interior of West Africa, most likely in the region that French slavers called the Guinea Coast, in a community of farmers and traders whose world is organized around family lineage, seasonal agriculture, and religious practice that has been continuous for longer than European civilization has existed in its current form. You have a name given by your mother, a language, a set of relationships, a place in a specific social structure. You are not a category. You are a person inside a world. You are taken at roughly 17 or 18 years old. The circumstances vary. Some men were captured in raids conducted by neighboring kingdoms who sold prisoners to European traders. Some were taken directly by Portuguese or French coastal raiders. The method matters less than the outcome. You are bound, marched to the coast over days or weeks, and held in a coastal fort, a stone structure built specifically for this purpose, where captured Africans waited in underground holding cells for the ships to arrive. The cells are below the waterline. The smell is what you remember first, and then the darkness, and then the sound of the ocean through the stone above your head. The ship is a French négrier, a vessel purpose-built for the transport of enslaved people, with extra decks constructed in the hold to maximize the number of bodies that can be packed into the available space. You are allocated roughly 1.5 meters of length and less than 1 meter of height, enough to lie flat but not enough to sit upright. You are chained at the ankle to the man beside you. The crossing from the West African coast to Saint-Domingue takes between 6 and 10 weeks, depending on wind conditions. For most of those weeks, you are in the hold. The Middle Passage is documented in enough survivor accounts to describe with precision. The heat in the hold is constant and extreme. The bodies of 300 people in an enclosed space in tropical waters generate a temperature that has been described by ship surgeons as near unbearable, even for the brief periods they entered to check on the cargo. The ventilation is inadequate. When the weather turns bad and the hatches are sealed entirely, the air thickens to a point where men lose consciousness. Dysentery moves through the hold continuously. The floor of the hold becomes what it becomes, and you lie in it for weeks, and there is nothing to be done about it. Men die. The bodies are brought up and dropped over the side. The chains of the dead man are unlocked and redistributed. You arrive in Saint-Domingue having lost roughly 1/4 of your body weight. You are brought ashore with the other survivors, examined by a physician whose job is to assess commercial value, cleaned superficially, and sold at auction within days of arrival. The planter who purchases you notes your age and apparent physical condition in a ledger. He does not note your name, because your name is not information he requires. He gives you a French name, a single name, no family name, because enslaved people in Saint-Domingue are not legally permitted family names. The name he gives you is common, interchangeable, the same name given to dozens of other men on the same plantation. What follows is called the seasoning. It is a period of roughly 1 to 3 years during which newly arrived Africans, called bosals by the colony's classification system, are broken into the plantation's routines. The mortality rate during seasoning is estimated at between 30 and 50%. The causes are multiple. Tropical diseases to which West Africans have partial but not complete immunity, the radical change in diet and water, the physical demands of plantation labor imposed on bodies already weakened by the Middle Passage, and the systematic destruction of every social and cultural structure the new arrival possessed. You are forbidden to speak your language. You are forbidden to practice your religion. You are given no connection to the community you came from, and no legitimate connection to the community around you. You are, by legal definition under the Code Noir, the French colonial law governing enslaved people, movable property, not a person, a thing. Your body adapts because bodies adapt. The diseases that do not kill you in the first year leave partial resistance behind. Your muscles rebuild on the plantation diet of salted cod, cassava, and whatever can be grown in the small provision plots that enslaved people are permitted to cultivate on Sundays. The one day the plantation does not formally require your labor, though informal demands continue regardless. You learn the Creole that is developed in Saint-Domingue as the common language of the enslaved population, a mixture of French, West African languages, and the specific vocabulary of plantation life. You learn who on the plantation can be trusted and who cannot. You learn the hierarchy, the difference between the field gangs and the domestic workers, between the African-born bosal and the Creole-born enslaved people who have been here for generations. You learn to read the overseer's mood from 20 meters away. You are not broken. You are reshaped, which is different. And the men who designed the system understand the difference. They do not want you broken. A broken man cannot cut cane. They want you functional, contained, and without a future you can imagine clearly enough to move toward. This is the actual work of the plantation system, running underneath the sugar and the profit margins. It is the daily, grinding, institutional erasure of the possibility that things could be otherwise. You are 20 years old. You cut cane from 4 in the morning until dark. Your hands do not fully close. The mill turns through the night. The sugar cycle in Saint-Domingue runs on a calendar that has nothing to do with the human body and everything to do with the cane. Planting begins in the autumn when the rains slow. The cane grows for 12 to 18 months, tall, dense, requiring constant weeding and irrigation work that occupies the field gangs through the long growing season. Then the harvest arrives, and the plantation shifts into a different mode entirely, a continuous round-the-clock operation that runs from January through June, and during which the concept of rest is suspended almost completely. You are in the first gang, the heaviest laborers, the strongest men and women on the plantation, assigned to the cutting. You rise before 4 in the morning, to the sound of the overseer's bell. You are in the field before dawn, with a machete that you are responsible for keeping sharp, and that you do not own. The cane stands roughly 3 meters tall, the stalks thick as a man's wrist, and you cut at the base with a single angled stroke, strip the leaves with a second stroke, and stack the stalks for collection. You do this continuously, moving down the row for 16 hours. The sun rises, and the heat builds, and the humidity in the cane field, surrounded by tall stalks that block every breath of wind, becomes a physical pressure. The cut edges of the cane are sharp enough to open skin, without any sensation at the moment of contact. By mid-morning, your forearms are cross-hatched with small, bleeding cuts that you do not notice until the sweat reaches them. The cane must move from field to mill within hours of cutting, because the juice begins to degrade immediately. This creates an urgency that runs through every part of the harvest operation. The cutters must cut fast, the carriers must move fast, the mill must run continuously, the boiling house at the end of the process must never stop. Everything is connected, and everything is under pressure. and the human beings inside this system are the mechanism through which that pressure is transmitted. The mill is animal-powered. 2 or 3 large horizontal rollers turned by oxen walking in a circle, through which the cane is fed by hand to extract the juice. The work of feeding the rollers is performed by enslaved people, who stand at the mechanism continuously, pushing the stalks through the gap. The danger is constant and specific. If a hand or a sleeve catches in the rollers, the mechanism does not stop. It is too heavy to stop quickly. Every mill in Saint-Domingue keeps a machete mounted on the wall beside the rollers, for the specific purpose of amputating the arm of someone caught in the mechanism before the rollers reach the shoulder. This is not an emergency measure. It is a standard operating procedure noted in plantation management guides of the period as the correct response to the situation. You learn this in your first week at the mill. You never forget it. The juice extracted by the mill runs into collection vats and then moves to the boiling house, a large stone building containing a series of progressively smaller copper kettles arranged in a line, each heated by a furnace burning cane waste. The juice is moved from kettle to kettle, clarified with lime, skimmed, reduced, and eventually crystallized into raw sugar. The boiling house operates at temperatures that make the cane field feel temperate by comparison. The workers inside, mostly women assigned to the lighter skilled labor of the kettles, manage fires and ladles and the precise timing of the reduction process in heat that causes constant burns from splattered syrup. The burns are treated with nothing. There is no medical care on the plantation for field workers, beyond the most basic wound dressing, administered by an enslaved person designated as the plantation's nurse with minimal training and minimal supplies. You work the cutting 6 days a week through the harvest season. On Sundays, you are technically free from plantation labor. The Code Noir, the French colonial law that governs the lives of enslaved people in Saint-Domingue, mandates Sunday rest and forbids the sale of enslaved people on Sundays. The Code Noir also mandates adequate food, clothing, and humane treatment. On paper, in Paris, these provisions exist. On the plantation, in the northern plain of Saint-Domingue, they are theoretical. The Sunday provision plot, the small piece of ground where enslaved people grow supplementary food, requires Sunday labor to produce anything. The choice between rest and eating is not difficult. You dig on Sundays. Your diet consists of a weekly ration of salted cod, a measure of cassava flour, and whatever the provision plot produces, sweet potatoes, plantains, some vegetables when the season allows. It is insufficient in calories for the labor being demanded of your body, and this insufficiency is constant and cumulative. You are always operating at a deficit. Your body draws on its own reserves to cover the gap between what is consumed and what is required, and those reserves do not fully replenish during the harvest season. By June, when the cutting ends, you are visibly thinner than you were in January, and the months between harvests are partly a process of biological recovery before the next cutting season begins the depletion again. The overseers are armed. On most Saint-Domingue plantations, the primary disciplinary tool is the cart whip, a long, heavy leather instrument whose use is formally regulated by the Code Noir at no more than 50 strokes for any single offense. The regulation is theoretical. The overseer on your plantation uses it for lateness, for insufficient cutting speed, for looking at him with an expression he interprets as defiance, and for reasons that require no articulation because no articulation is required. You carry the scars of it across your back and shoulders in overlapping lines that have raised and thickened over years of re-injury and incomplete healing. You do not speak about this. Nobody speaks about it. Speaking about it to anyone outside the plantation is impossible. You do not leave the plantation. And speaking about it inside the plantation is a form of public vulnerability that the system is designed to punish. You learn to carry what has been done to your body as internal information only, held without expression, processed at night in the darkness of the barracks building, where the field gang sleeps in rows on wooden platforms. But in the darkness, other things are spoken. quietly, in Creole, in the spaces between the overseer's rounds. Information moves. There are men who have been to the hills. There are ceremonies, the voodoo ceremonies that the plantation system forbids and cannot fully suppress, because the religion arrived from West Africa in the bodies of the people themselves and cannot be confiscated at the dock. There are names passed in low voices. There is a name that has been circulating through the northern plantations for 2 years now, attached to a man who was enslaved and is now something else, something the plantation system does not have a category for. The name is Boukman. You hear it for the first time on a Tuesday night in the summer of 1791 in the barracks from a man sleeping 2 platforms away from you who leans close in the dark and says it once, quietly, with a particular weight that is not quite hope and not quite warning but contains elements of both. You say nothing. You file it in the same place where you file everything that cannot be expressed openly, inside, deep, maintained carefully in the dark. The plantation has eyes everywhere, and most of them belong to other enslaved people. This is the system's most efficient cruelty. The hierarchy it constructs among the people it owns creates informants out of desperation. Because the difference between a field laborer and a domestic worker, between the first gang and the second gang, between a man who sleeps in the barracks and a man who sleeps in a slightly less cold corner of the barracks, is maintained partly through the selective distribution of information to the overseer. You have known this since your 2nd year on the plantation. You trust nobody completely. You trust some people partially. You maintain the distinction carefully because the cost of error is not abstract. The voodoo ceremonies happen in the hills above the plantation, in the hours between midnight and dawn on nights when the overseer's schedule creates a gap wide enough to move through. Getting there requires leaving the barracks without triggering the night watch, crossing roughly 3 kilometers of plantation ground and hill path in complete darkness, attending the ceremony, and returning before the 4 o'clock bell. The physical difficulty is manageable. The risk is the problem. An enslaved person found outside the plantation boundaries at night without a written pass, a pass that no field laborer can obtain, faces punishment that the Code Noir caps at 50 lashes, but that plantation reality does not cap at anything. You go anyway. The first time is in the spring of 1790, brought by the man 2 platforms away, whose name is Jean, and who has been going for 2 years, and who judges, after watching you for 18 months, that you are someone who can be trusted with the information. The path is narrow and steep, and you move in silence, single file. 8 people from your plantation joining streams of people from neighboring plantations, until there are perhaps 150 gathered in a clearing that the hill forest conceals from the plain below. The ceremony is voodoo, specifically the Petro tradition, the harder, fiercer branch of Haitian religious practice that developed in the crucible of plantation slavery, and whose spirits are not the gentle intermediaries of the West African traditions you partially remember from childhood, but something forged under specific conditions of violence and survival. The drum is a hollowed log played with bare hands, kept to a volume that does not carry down to the plain. The fire is small and contained. The ceremony is conducted by a hungan, a priest, whose name you do not ask and are not told. What happens in the ceremony is not theater and not escape. It is the reconstruction in the hours available of the interior life that the plantation system spends every waking hour attempting to dismantle. You have a name here that is not the French name given by the planter. You have a community with its own rules of obligation and reciprocity that exist entirely outside the plantation's authority. You have access to a cosmology, a way of understanding the world and your position in it that does not require your own degradation as a foundational premise. For the hours of the ceremony, you are not property. This is not a small thing. It is, in the conditions of Saint-Domingue in 1790, an act of resistance simply by existing. By the summer of 1791, the atmosphere in the northern plain has changed in ways that are difficult to articulate, but impossible to ignore. There are more passes being refused, more arbitrary punishments, more militia patrols on the roads between plantations. The white planter class in Saint-Domingue is frightened, not specifically of the enslaved population yet, but of the political instability arriving from France, where the revolution has been underway for 2 years, and the question of whether the rights of man apply to people of color in the colonies is being argued with increasing violence between the free-colored population and the white planters. The planters are distracted and distracted, nervous men with whips are more dangerous than calm ones. Boukman Duty is a coachman and voodoo priest, a houngan, on the Clément plantation, a large man of Jamaican origin whose physical presence and religious authority have made him a central figure in the network of ceremony gatherings across the northern plain. He is not the only organizer of what is coming, but he is the most visible, and his name is the one that travels. In the second week of August 1791, word moves through the network with a specificity that previous communications have not carried. Not a general gathering, a specific date, a specific location. The Bois Caimont, a wooded area on the Le Normand de Mézy plantation, on the night of August 22nd. You receive the information from Jean on a Wednesday, passed in the barracks after the evening count, in 4 words of Creole that require no elaboration. You lie on your platform in the dark and hold the information and think about what it means. You have been thinking in various forms about what it means to act rather than endure for 4 years since the first ceremony in the hills. The thinking has been theoretical. August 22nd is not theoretical. The night of the ceremony at Bois Caimont is a storm night. Heavy rain and thunder that cover the sound of movement and assembly and the drum. Roughly 200 people gather in the clearing. You are among them. Boukman speaks. His voice is the kind of voice that a large man with absolute conviction produces in a specific moment. Not loud, because loud carries, but carrying anyway, through the rain, through the dark. What he says will be partially recorded later by people who were not there, filtered through fear and translation, and the exact words are therefore uncertain. What is certain is the effect of the words on the people who hear them. You feel it as a physical thing, a shift in the body, in the chest, the particular sensation of a decision being made at a level deeper than thought. The ceremony ends before dawn. You return to the plantation by the hill path in the rain, arriving in the barracks before the 4 o'clock bell. You lie down. The bell rings. You get up. You take your machete from the rack beside the door. You walk to the field in the dark with the rest of the first gang, taking your position in the row, waiting for the light to build enough to see the cane. You cut. The machete moves in its arc, the same arc 10,000 times before this morning. Base of the stalk, strip the leaves, stack. The overseer's torch moves along the row behind you. The mill turns in the darkness beyond the field. The air is thick and wet from the storm. 3 nights from now, the northern plain will be on fire. You know this. You cut the cane, and you know this, and you let the knowledge sit in the same interior place where everything else is kept, deep, maintained carefully, waiting for the moment it becomes action rather than information. The sun rises over Saint-Domingue. The cane field fills with light and heat and the sound of machetes working. Nobody looking at you from the outside would see anything different from any other morning of your working life. That is exactly how it was designed to look. August 22nd, 1791. The signal fires begin in the north on the Turpin plantation, shortly after 10 o'clock at night. You see the first one from the edge of the provision plot where you are working in the last light, a glow on the horizon that is the wrong color and the wrong shape for anything the plantation produces. Then a second fire further east. Then a third, closer, on the Clément plantation where Boukman worked. By the time the overseer's bell begins ringing in frantic, irregular bursts that mean something other than a shift change, The northern plain is illuminated by a line of fires stretching across the horizon like a second sunset. You stand in the provision plot for a moment with the small iron hoe in your hand, watching the fires grow. The decision was made 3 nights ago in the rain at Bois Caimont. The decision was made over 4 years of ceremony in the hills. The decision was made on the ship crossing, in the hold, in the dark, chained at the ankle to a man whose name you never learned. It was made the first morning you picked up a machete on this plantation and understood fully what the rest of your life was intended to look like. You drop the hoe. You walk to the tool rack beside the barracks and take your machete. Around you, the plantation is coming apart. The overseer is on horseback, shouting. The other overseers are gathering near the main house. The white planter family is visible in the upper windows of the great house, with lights moving behind them. Jean is beside you without a word exchanged. Others from the first gang are there. The night smells of rain and distant smoke, and the particular sweetness of cut cane that has been the background of your entire existence on this island. And tonight it smells like freedom, which turns out to smell exactly like everything else, but feel entirely different. The rebellion spreads across the northern plain with a speed that reflects years of preparation disguised as compliance. The plantation network that carried ceremony schedules and Bookman's name now carries tactical coordination, which plantations are rising, which roads are held, where the militia is moving. More than 1,000 enslaved people are in open rebellion within the first hours. By dawn, the number is climbing toward several thousand. By the end of the first week, it will exceed 100,000 across the northern province. The violence is extreme, and it is not surprising that it is extreme. The people conducting it have spent years, in many cases decades, as the recipients of systematic violence whose only limitation was the economic calculation that a dead laborer cannot cut cane. The plantation system created the conditions, and the men who designed it should not have been surprised by the result, though the records suggest that many of them were. The great houses burn, the cane fields burn, the boiling houses, the mills, the equipment imported from France at significant cost. All of it burns, because the fire is not just tactical. It is a statement about what this infrastructure represents and who paid for it with their bodies. You move with a group from your plantation and 2 neighboring ones through the first night. The militia, white colonists armed and organized to suppress exactly this kind of event, responds quickly in some areas and not at all in others, depending on local organization and the speed of the uprising's spread. Where the militia holds a road, you go around it. Where it does not hold a road, you go through. Your machete is not a weapon designed for this purpose, but it is the weapon you have, and your right arm has 20 years of practice delivering force through a blade with precision. And in the darkness on the road between 2 burning plantations, the distinction between cutting cane and the other thing becomes something you file in the same interior place where everything else is kept. Bookman is captured by French colonial forces in November of 1791, roughly 3 months after the night at Bois Caimont. He is executed, and his head is displayed on a pike in Cap Français, the colony's main city, with a written notice attached, identifying him as a criminal rather than the leader of a revolution, because the colonial authorities understand, correctly, that a revolution requires symbolic management as well as military suppression. The display does not have the intended effect. The rebellion has moved past any single person's ability to start or stop it. You do not see Bookman's end. By November, you are in the hills of the northern province with several hundred others in territory that the colonial militia has not successfully recaptured, living on what can be foraged and occasionally raided from plantation supply stores. The hills are difficult terrain for organized military forces, and favorable terrain for people who have spent years moving through the dark on narrow paths without making noise. You are cold at night, in a way that Saint-Domingue's lowlands never prepared you for. You are hungry in a way that is different from plantation hunger. Plantation hunger was administered, controlled, calibrated to keep you functional. This hunger is your own, which makes it more bearable in ways that are difficult to explain logically but are immediately clear in practice. The rebellion does not resolve quickly or cleanly. The Haitian Revolution will last 12 years, absorbing interventions from Spain, Britain, and Napoleon's France before the final declaration of independence on January 1st, 1804. The men and women who lit the fires in August of 1791 will mostly not survive to see that date. The mortality among the formerly enslaved population during the Revolution is enormous. From combat, from disease, from the deliberate policies of the French forces who, under Napoleon's orders, attempt in 1801 and 1802 to restore slavery and require the systematic elimination of the rebellion's leadership to do so. You contract fever in the hill camps in the winter of 1791. It is not the dramatic death of a battlefield. It is the unremarkable death of an exhausted body in a cold camp with no medicine, the immune system finally presenting the bill for 30 years of accumulated debt. The fever comes on a Wednesday. You are aware enough on the first day to understand what is happening. You have seen it enough times to read the progression accurately. You lie in the camp under a rough shelter of cut branches, and you listen to the sounds of the hills at night. The insects, the distant sound of what might be militia movement on a lower road, the voices of the people around you in the camp, the particular Creole that you learned as a survival tool and came to speak as a first language. You think, in the intervals between fever and sleep, about the village you came from, the specific quality of morning light in a place you have not seen for 20 years, the name your mother gave you that the planter's ledger replaced with a French word. The name has been yours again, privately, since Bois Caimont. You think it, now, in the dark, in the hills of Saint-Domingue, with the fires of the northern plain still glowing below you on clear nights. It is yours. It was always yours. They could not take it, because it lived in a place the plantation system could not reach, the same interior place where the ceremony knowledge lived, and Bookman's name, and the decision made in the rain on August 19th. You do not see 1804. You do not see the Haitian flag sewn from a French tricolor with the white that represented the colonizers, torn out from the center. You do not see the first black republic in the Western Hemisphere declare itself into existence on the bones of everything the plantation system built and everything it destroyed. But you were the fire that started it. Not the name in the history book, not the general or the founding document. The fire, the actual, literal fire on the Turpin plantation on the night of August 22nd, 1791, carried from a hill ceremony in the rain to a provision plot at the edge of a cane field, in the hands of a man who dropped a hoe and picked up a machete and walked into the dark toward the burning horizon. You just lived the life of a man who helped start one of the most consequential revolutions in human history, and whose name was recorded nowhere. Saint-Domingue produced 40% of Europe's sugar in the 1780s. European consumers sweetened their coffee with it every morning without a single thought about the 30,000 people who collapsed in the cane fields each year to produce it. The distance between that world and this one was purchased entirely by people who were never compensated, never commemorated, and never asked whether they consented to the arrangement in the first place. What I want to know from you is this. What stays with you longest after this story? The hold of the ship? The mill with the machete on the wall? Or the moment in the provision plot when a man dropped a hoe and chose the thing that the plantation system spent 30 years trying to convince him was impossible? Tell me in the comments. And if this kind of history matters to you, subscribe, because there are 100 more lives like this one, and every single one of them deserves to be remembered.